today was I've built a report already. I thought it would be best to start with a report as opposed to watching me build one, and we'll go through the various aspects of this report. But before we do, I'll just produce the report. Now this is a two-pass report, so it takes a little longer to produce than normal. So there will be a blank section of about 4 or 5 seconds that in between when I produce the report and the report actually is produced. So what we're seeing is the client sales listing with the various dates and times and page one-ofs and so on, and I'll show you briefly how that's done. We've got an indicator on the left-hand side, which is basically displays when the month-to-date sales is greater than a certain percentage of the year-to-date sales. Over on the right-hand column, we've got month-to-date sales as a percentage of the grand total and year-to-date sales as a percentage of the grand total. We've got a break total there with a sales executive with the month-to-date and the year-to-date sales totals, and that carries on through the various reps until we get to the, I'll just go straight to the last page, until we get to the last sales rep and the report grand total. And then you can see down here I've got the month-to-date sales as a percentage of the year-to-date sales. That's that as a percentage of that. And then the client with the highest month-to-date sales is this particular client, and the client with the highest year-to-date sales is this particular client. So there's quite a bit going on in this particular report. So I'm just going to go back to the actual report itself and show you how this is constructed. So we've just got a basic report where I've added client name, street address, town, city, month-to-date and year-to-date sales. So for the client code, we have done the additional read of read group 2, db other record 2 to the client sales file. And there's also a process after there of db.i.db client, which I'll explain what that does shortly. So what that means is that we can add the client from the client sales file, the month-to-date and the year-to-date sales figures. We've also got this green LED light, which is just an image, and it's called greenled.jpg. And as I said, there's some function that turns that off and on based on the percentage of the month-to-date sales versus the year-to-date sales. And then we've got the percentage of month-to-date sales and the percentage of year-to-date sales, and I'll explain how they are put together shortly. Over on the right-hand side, we've got the account manager. Anything that's outside of this red line on a report does not appear on the physical report, but can be used to as a work variable to support the variables that are on the report. So if we have a look at this account manager report, account manager field, we see that this is read group 3, read step 1, db other record 3, db executive. So we're reading from the account manager and the client file. We're going to read the executive file, and the reason we're doing that is because we want the executive name. So here I've got a break on the account manager, and that break on the account manager is it's going to display the account manager's name. So you can see there's the executive name from the executive file, db other record 3. So instead of having the account manager itself in the break, excuse me, in the break, then we've got the actual account manager itself. Now the other thing that you can see here is that I've got this row span on this report. Rick, I can hear you if you want to turn your mic off. This detail, I'm sorry about that, this account manager description, we've actually given it a row span of 40 pixels. What that'll do is that'll put some space between the end of this line and the start of the next row. I'll just show you that in the actual run report. Because the report break, even though I've specified that the report break distance, if you like, is between this blue line and this blue line, DesignBais calculates the depth based on the fields that are actually on the report. That allows you to space your breaks out a little bit more and just makes the form a little bit easier to work within design mode. So you can, as I demonstrated there, you can make the spacing between the end of a single break and the start of the next detail run much larger by increasing the row span of one of those particular fields. So if we go to the break total, you can see there that there's quite a bit of space, between the end of that line and the start of the client, the second account rep's clients, and that's because of the space. The other alternative, if you want to have the break occur as a page break, you can click page break in the properties of the actual account manager in this case, or the break of the grand total. And I'm going to click there that I want to suppress the page break if it occurs with any other break. So that way, if I've got a situation where the account manager changes and we get a page break and the report grand total also is invoked at that particular point in time, there will only be one page break between the two. It'll suppress this one, which is the account manager, and produce the break after the report grand total. So if I submit that now, turn test mode on. Again, I'm sorry, this is a two-pass report, so it does take a little bit of time, and I'll explain the reasoning behind the two-pass report shortly. So you can see now that we've got the page break there. After the sales rep. And then at the final part, you've got well, that's actually run over just because we've run out of room on the page. DesignBais tries to hold complete sections together and to make sure that they appear on a page, particularly if you've got multi-values. So if you're producing a report with multi-values, with say, and the depth of the multi-value is 4 or 5 lines deep, it'll try to ensure that that entire multi-value fits on a page. So that's the page breaking mechanism. So let's have a look at this little LED and what we're doing with that. If I go to this program, oh sorry, I'll just go back to the start. You can see here that we've got a process before read and a process and a report read process. So the report read process can be fired after each report read if I want to do some extra processing. The before report is called if I want to set up things before the report, if I want to specify particular selection criteria. If I want to build a temporary file, I can do that in the before report section. So I'll go back into this. In this case though, with the LEDs, I'm actually doing something in the after read of the client code. So here of this secondary read for the client sales, I've got a process after the read there of db.i.db client. So we have a look at the after read for db.i.db client, the program. I have an after read event in my, not in that program I don't, in this one I do, here it is. After read, in case the screen number is webinar 2301, which this one is. If DB other record 2 month to date sales plus 0 is not 0, then I set a little T1 flag there. I've got a debug there I could get rid of, and I set a percentage flag, percentage calculation, and if the percentage is less than 30, turn the green LED to a transparent JPEG using DB image spec. So what is on the form now as green LED is replaced when the percentage is less than 30 to a transparent JPEG. Otherwise it's turned, otherwise it remains as itself. That's probably superfluous, that code. And if there's no month-to-date sales, then it also sets it to a transparent JPEG, if that's the case. So we'll have a look at that in action. So you can see that the LED is displaying when this value is greater than 30% of that value and not at other times. That's useful if you want to put indicators on your report that are graphical indicators as this is. You can also use that same technique if you want to put images of products, images of clients, if it's a client listing and you might have their, or an employee listing and you might have the employees' faces, you could put that on there if you wanted to. So DB image spec can be used in that criteria. DB image spec can also be used in the header of the report. So if I'm producing a page per client as opposed to an individual line per client, then I can change the image in the header using exactly the same technique, because it is just an image as this green LED is. So I can refer to this, even though this is called customer main.jpg, I can refer to that in my program exactly the same as the detail line, regardless of whether it's in the header, the column header, or the detail section. So we'll have a look now at these month-to-date sales. Or actually, before I do that, I just want to quickly explain that the month-to-date sales that I've added to these breaks, month-to-date sales here and here, and likewise down here in the report grand totals, they are just exactly the same dictionary as is placed in the header section. So if I place month-to-date sales in the header section, in the detail section, and then place the same dictionary in the breaks, they will produce the accumulated total. Any numeric field added to a form will automatically be accumulated in the report generator. So that means the same field added then to a break total will give you the accumulated value. So we'll go into the month-to-date sales. And this month-to-date sales, this percentage of month-to-date sales is actually an accumulated figure. Is actually a derived total, and it's based on the accumulated figures. So if I go into View Code Block, you'll see that this is a code block, and this can just be a standard piece of code in the report read section. I've just decided to put it in a derived field and put it in the derived section just to demonstrate the code blocks really. So here we've got locate DBS month-to-date sales in the accumulators list. Now the accumulators list is essentially a list of fields that are on the form that are being accumulated. So an example of that, if I put a CRT in this and just display this as this is being produced, so I'll compile that in the code block, close that, produce the report. I'm just going to get the sorry, I must have typed that in incorrectly because that's just coming out as blank. The first pass, I'm sorry. That looks better. Sorry, on the first pass, the accumulators list is not set. Right, there's two passes in this report. You'll see here there's the DB accumulator list equals this particular value, month-to-date sales, year-to-date sales, derived 2 and derived 1. So they are the values that are being accumulated, i.e. the numeric fields that are on the report, that can then be used in other either break totals or other code blocks or other formulas or algorithms that you're using in your report. There's $dollars coming out of one of the other events, one of the other after display or code block events. So I'll get rid of that. So in this case, I'm locating DBS MTD sales in the accumulators list, and then setting the report month-to-date sales. So in other words, the total month-to-date sales is DB break totals 2, POS. Now DB break totals has the totals associated with the break level in the same position as the accumulators list is storing them. So I'm using 2, POS here because I'm using 2, POS because that is the second break. The grand total is the second break on the report. Somebody just asked a question, should you use DBDSs or CRTs? The reason I use CRTs is because the reports run in a phantom. We have no idea how long a report's going to take to run when you submit it. And because of the timeouts in the web server, any report that's going to take longer than 5 minutes is the default timeout will effectively hold up the session for 5 minutes whilst it's running and time out. So all reports as a standard run to a phantom process. So the phantom's actually recording the output. There is a DBDS that does get written against the report number and in the sessions file, and you can view that if you like, but I tend to just use CRTs now, or alternatively write out a debug out to a temporary file yourself. So in this case, locate the month-to-date sales in the accumulators list, and that gives a position, and then I can set the report month-to-date sales. If report month-to-date sales, that should be, Oh no, that is DBS, sorry, if DBS.month-to-date sales. Now because I'm using the code block, all of these values get evaluated for me automatically. If I was to do this in code, it would be if DB other record 2 dbs.month-to-date.sales, then so that's what it would look like if it was in basic code. But because I'm using the code block, these values are evaluated and produced automatically for me, so I can actually use the same values that are appearing on the report. As here you can see I've used derived to. So if there is anything in the month-to-date sales, derived to is the month-to-date sales over the report month-to-date sales by 10,000 in that case, because then I'll MD to it later. It's a percentage. And if the month-to-date sales is greater than DB store 1, so DB store 1 is just a variable that holds values continuously for a session. So in this case it's holding it for a report session. I'm just setting the month-to-date sales values, and then I'm putting the DB key, which is the actual client code, into DB work 1. Because later on I want to specify who the largest client is as far as the sales for month to date. So I can compile that, and I've got no warnings there. If I in compilers that do have warnings, if I put some extra bit of code at the end of that, then you can see there that that's an unassigned variable. So in other words, DesignBais' pre-compiler didn't recognize that variable and spat it out and then in the compiler. So DesignBais' pre-compiler will find these particular values in the report and replace those with what their long version is. The code block is given a name of, it looks a little arbitrary, but it's actually the client file. It's part of that particular form. It's a derived field, and it's derived.to. And the reason there's little X's in the middle of it is that that's one of the only characters that we can use. We're really stuck with alpha characters for program source in when you're looking at across the board. Some compilers in some PIC platforms support underscores and dashes and all that, and others just don't. So we've stuck with the lowercase x, and you'll see in version 6 that there's lots of lowercase x's and z's in as delimiters, basically because cross-browser then is another environment where delimiters become an issue. So if you're wondering why they're there, that's just they're there because we didn't have much choice, unfortunately. Now, if I'm going to add this report, this field then is on the report as derived to, but if I export this to a spreadsheet, I don't want derived to in the header. I want something else in the header, and in this case I've replaced derived to with percentage of month-to-date sales. Somebody's just asked, is there any automatic handling of divide by zeros, or does the code block need to handle that? No, you need to handle that in your code block. I think you'll see in my code, if I've listed through that, you'll see some division by zeros. It's just basically because I haven't bothered to clean that up for this example. But no, that's something that you need to do exactly the same in a code block as you would in a standard programming environment. Likewise with the year-to-date sales. Just doing basically exactly the same thing, but this time for year-to-date sales as opposed to the month-to-date, and I'm setting derived 1 in this case, and setting DB store 2 for the year-to-date sales. So that way I've later on I can use those values down here in the client with the highest month-to-date sales total is going to use the DB the two work variables that are set in both of those fields. So if we look at this report running, we'll get to see the results of that. I did notice that there was an issue in this report, so I may have introduced a bug in the report writer in 614, which is due for release shortly. So that's something that I need to look at. But so you can see here that there's the month-to-date sales. So it's taking this 453 as a percentage of the grand total, and returning that result, and also the year-to-date sales is taking that and calculating that as a percentage of the total. So those sorts of, now that will not work unless you have two-pass reports ticked. Now what a two-pass report does, and that's the reason why this report's taking a little bit longer than it would normally, is the first pass goes through and calculates all of the totals, and it builds a matrix of totals which is effectively presented to you as DB report, that DB break totals variable. Then it actually reruns the report again, but then in the second time through it does all of the actual displaying logic of the report writer, which it doesn't do in the first pass. But then you can use, as I've done in my programs, in my code blocks, you can use the variables that are calculated in the first pass of the report. So in the first pass of the report, these break totals, this routine here, will essentially not do anything. It will get run just in case there are values that are then going to be accumulated again. But essentially it is just run in a mock run, and then in the second pass of the report the DB break totals will actually have values in them. So that's why this report is a two-pass report. There's some other things going on this report. You can see this grey shading bar. In this case, the grey shading bar there is a box or a line, and it's got a line color of a light grey, which is the EEE. Likewise with a line in the background color, and that is repeated in the detail section, starting from the first row of the detail section and repeating every second. So if I change that to a 3, which some of our clients do, some of our clients only repeat every third. I don't know why. We'll just see what the result is when this report is displayed. So you can see now that that's started on the first line and then repeated every third, whereas the original had it as every second. So that's a very simple way of getting that alternate line paper result. Gosh, gone blank. That printed paper output that you see in more of an older day type paper than modern day. Okay, then we've got these breaks. Now this is again just a box, and this time it's got a slightly different color, and this report grand total also has it's just a box with a slightly different color, and I'll just add one of those to the form so you can see how that is done. So when I add a box or a line to the form, it effectively just gives me I think it's 100 by 50 box. So if you want to keep it as a box, you can just keep the row span, and I'll just increase the column span and leave that black for the moment. So now we've just got a large box that's got a black outline, and then we've got, if I want that to be a line, I make it 1 pixel high, and now it's a line, and then any sort of makeup of change of 1 will turn that into a box. If I want it just to be a shaded area, then I can just make it, say, yellow and yellow, and that will give me a shaded area, though we don't see it because of the blue highlight. You've just said that the edge of the selection is actually giving me a the yellow box if you with the blue in between. If I put that on the actual report, you'll see that as a yellow box on the report. Must apologise, my machine keeps coming up with this on my other session, keeps coming up with wanting to run a virus scan, and that's, oh, I didn't save that. That's causing me a little bit of frustration, because I don't actually want to run a virus scan in the middle of the, it's telling me that the virus scanner needs to be updated and wants to be run now, and I don't particularly want to do that in the middle of a webinar if I can avoid it. So there you go. There's the yellow box on the bottom of the report. The other thing, as far as reporting is concerned, is that one of the things that we can do, if I don't have this sort of line shading device happening, is that I can build lines running. I'll just delete that. I can build lines running down the page, and that's going to mess up my percentages down the bottom, but I will show you briefly how that's done. Same mechanism with the box or the line. Add that to the report. So if I put that there, you can see that that's putting a box around the street line 1. So if I just move that over a little bit to say 352, I'll leave the row, give it a column span of say 140, but make the row span say 700. That's now just needs to be moved over a bit further. That's now given me a box that's actually a little bit too long, because I want it to cut off around about the footer. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, so 620. So it's giving me a line that runs all the way down the page. Now, because the box starts in the column header section, it won't take the depth of this box into the calculations for the depth of each row. If I put that into the detail section, then every detail section, every detail line will be 620 pixels long. So that's why when you're doing this type of outlines and stuff for columns, you always start it in the column header section. So I'll just run that so you can see the result of that. So that's the style of output that you can get with that sort of construct. So if you're building a statement and you want to list various items in a statement format, and then just produce one per page, so one client per page in a statement run, then you can build this sort of construct with your invoice numbers and your dates and your extended price over the right hand side, and then a total down the bottom of the page. Then you can do that, and then just have this as a multi-value field that is displayed per record. and then just break per client if that's the case. So it's very simple to turn this into from a listing into a single record per page type report. And you can see, as I expected, this here these figures at the end here are overridden by this particular box. And I'll just explain those particular totals as well. So in this month-to-date sales column, this I believe is also a derived field, and it's percentage month-to-date of the report. There's that dollar sign that was showing up in the debugs. So in this case, I'm locating the month-to-date sales in the accumulators list and then displaying the month-to-date total, or calculating the month-to-date total based on the accumulators. Now what that is the accumulators list is the actual field name, so DBS month-to-date sales, DBS year-to-date sales, and so on. The accumulators are the actual totals for each of the breaks. So in a single pass report, you don't use the DB break totals. If you just want to know what say the month to date is as a percentage of the year to date, then you can just use DB accumulators in a single pass. So in this case, I'm doing exactly the same thing and locating the year to date sales in the accumulators list. Again, that's just the list of the field names, so it just gets a position of the fields that are accumulated. And then I take the year-to-date total from the accumulators of the same position. Do a simple calc to get the percentage. There should be an if values around that to stop the non-numeric datas or the divide by zeros. But anyway, that's close enough. So there's the derived for field, and I'm asking that be displayed in an MD2 format. Because the derived fields are standalone fields, they don't rely on there being a field in the database to support or a dictionary to support that field, then I need to specify a format for that. So typically I'd probably use MD2 or MD2 comma if it's a larger value. I'm setting it as a label bold, I'm right justifying it. And again, that's the text that will go into the spreadsheet if I export this report to a spreadsheet. So instead of it having derived for, it will have that heading in there. Okay, so then the client with the highest month-to-date sales is DB Work 1. So in my first routine that I showed you, the first code block, we had month-to-date sales as the percentage of month-to-date sales as a calculation, and in that routine it was setting DB Work 1 if the value of the month-to-date sales was the highest so far. It had set that the key DB Work 1 to the key at that particular point in time. So you can see there I'm doing a read then to DB other record to get the client details. So that's then allowing me to display the client name there. Likewise, the client with the highest year-to-date sales value, I'm storing into DB Work 2. So then there's DB. I've just added a dictionary or a field on the form that is DBC Key Part 2. It's got an attribute 2, so that's got the key for the largest year-to-date sales in it. And I'm reading that in read group 6, DB other record 6, and then adding the client, reading the client file. So then I can add the two fields to the form. This first field is the client name. This field is client name, this field is client name, and this field is client name. And the read pointer here, DB other record 4, is the first, is the read that occurs here, and DB other record 6 is the read that occurs here. So I can point the client name variable, in this case DBC client name, because the variable is the same. In this case and the other two cases, I just want to tell it what variable to use behind the scenes. So in this case, I'm going to use DB other record for read when that particular client changes, and also this one for when that particular client changes is DB other record SIGs in this instance. I can put programs in the break field. If I want to do calculations in the break field, I can call a subroutine there, and that will go through with a report break variable. I haven't actually used one in this instance because I'm using a derived field down here instead of the report grand total. Typically, most of the time you would use the program in the report grand total if you're going to add extra values to this report that were DB work variables or something like that. Likewise, you would do exactly the same in the break. The other alternative is to do as I have done here and put a percentage. Is to put a derived field in the actual break totals. And the derived fields can also use other derived fields in their calculations. So in this case, derived 4, the calculation could be using derived 2 and derived 1 if that's appropriate. So there's really not a lot more to go through as far as the report design is concerned. It is very much add fields to the form and then have either derived or calculations in your report read section. One of the things that I will cover briefly is the selection processes associated with these. Even though we are talking about selection processes in another webinar, I think it's important to understand the process flow as far as the selection processes are concerned. So I will go through that. Somebody's just asked about how do you control the font size. You can see here the client sales listing is just a standard text field, but in this case it's using the label header style. Exactly the same way as you set it up in the reports, in the forms designers, the report designer works the same way. And I'll just quickly show that style definition. Now this is using the style DBI rep, and here the label header, which is DBV6 report header in this case, and the header for that is it's Verdana. In actual fact, it probably should be Arial. I tend to use Arial fonts for reports because a lot of printers do not support Verdana as a standard. So I tend to use Arial, but in this case I've used Verdana. It's a 10-point font, bold and italic, and it's black. If I wanted to have other sorts of styles with, where there's borders and all of those sorts of things, you can do that. Though I tend to recommend that you limit the styling for reports to basically what appears in this top section if you can. The reason for that is that reports get emailed around the place. And they get unless you convert it to a PDF, of course, and then email the PDF. But a lot of the reports are produced in HTML format. Well, all of the reports are produced in HTML format, and the reason for that is that the reports have some active components, so I can have clickable fields and things like that in reports. The disadvantage with making them HTML is that you lose, once the report's been emailed, you lose the reference of the website for all the class definitions and stuff. So if you use just these fields here at the top, DesignBais will recreate those and put those longhand into the report. So that way, if they are emailed around, those styles will will go with it. In the next release, the additional style properties will also do the same thing. So I would hold off until 6.1.4 before I used additional style properties for reports. But as you can see, using this style now, that was against the label header. So then in here, I've just specified for this particular field to use the label header. I could also use a user style there if I wanted to select one. Sections are a little bit different in reports to forms, and that will change over time. We are getting a little bit smarter with sections in reports. You won't see the changes for that probably for 6 months, so that will be June 2012 for those who are watching this webinar in the recorded format. So sections are essentially detailed and summary sections. So if I go into sections here, you'll see that all of the sections are effectively main and they're all displayed. I can, however, make, say, these column headings here into a section called, say, detail. Oops. And I'll just do the next two. Okay, so those 4 headings are in a section called detail, and I'll just add another one to the form. Another output field and sorry, a text only field, and I'll put it in a section, say, called summary. The names don't matter, it's only just for demonstration purposes, and I'll just put the label executives there and add that to the form. I'm just going to add that to the form here for the moment, and then I'll move that. So I'll just get the coordinates of that. So that's at 140 and 60, so I'll put that at 140 and 60. So essentially now I've got a garbled, the other way around. So essentially I've got 2 fields now that are on top of each other. And if I run the report, I'll get 2 fields that are on top of each other. But in sections, I can say that the main is displayed all the time. The detail section is displayed only when the report's a detailed report, and the summary is displayed only on summary reports. So submit that, save, turn test mode on. So now produce a summary only of that report. So you can see that the executives, I probably should have got rid of those 2 up the top as well, but the executives are listed down the page. Now the detail's gone away and the heading just says executives. But when I run the detail report, the executive disappears and these other headings show up. So that's a neat way of producing 2 reports from the same report. and then giving the end user the choice as to whether they run the detailed version or the summary version of the same report. So you might have a situation where the standard is summary as the default style for the report. It might be summary only. Then if somebody wants to view the detailed version, they can turn summary only off. So I'll just talk very, very quickly about the way selection processes are used. And if you have any questions, start thinking of them now. So in this case, the selection name is DB Client Search 1, and that is a straightforward DesignBais selection. And it will just produce the selection and then run the report. The alternative would be to have a process before report that actually does some sort of compilation of a temporary file, writes out a temporary file, and then the selection process, all it does is essentially select that file or performs a get list, if you like. So you can have a situation where a lot of reports that are produced are effectively reports on temporary files that some sort of accumulator process runs beforehand that takes a list, a number of transactions, writes out some sort of accumulated summary of those into a temporary file. And that, if you're going to do that process, you do that in the before report process. I'm not sure whether I actually have a before report here. I'll just have a quick. No, I don't have one for this particular example, but so what I would do in my before report is I would specify that, go off and select the transaction file, open the temporary file, write the records out, save my list of items as a particular list name. Then the only thing that the selection process does is calls an alternate selection process that effectively does the get list in its create selection process. What I will talk about briefly though is a couple of these variables in the before report section. If I wanted to have a situation where I was building a report that was made up of many parts, so I might have a situation where I'm producing a statement, and because this is the first time I've produced a statement for the client, I also want to put a covering letter attached to the statement. Then what I can do is I can build what is called an include list. So in this case, you see I've got DB client rep 51 and also include DB client rep 52. So whenever I run this report DB client rep 51, a second report will also be appended to that. This only really works for reports that are reporting on a single record. It doesn't work real well for reports that are listing style reports, as the one that we've just run. This is really meant for a one page per item, if you like, report. Though it is also very, very good if I want to have reports that are built up of paragraphs. So I might have a situation where I'm producing some sort of legal document, and based on the criteria of the client, I can turn on or off various report components or paragraphs, and there is a report, DB report include page break variable also that allows you to turn on and off page breaks. So if I'm building, say, if I'm building some sort of legal document where I want to include various paragraphs which are in individual reports, then I can put them together using this DB report include, and also DB report there's another variable called DB report exclude. So as I'm running my reports, let's say, for instance, in this case, I'm saying use DB client rep 51 and DB client rep 52 in my before report process. Both of these reports will be included for each item that gets run unless I specify in a variable in my report process, in my actual report read process, so for every single item that gets run, there is a DB report exclude variable. So I can say at a particular point, if a particular state exists within a record, DB report.exclude equals DB rep 52. So at a particular point in time, only exclude this particular report. So if I'm building a statement run and I want to have some sort of marketing document that I also want to go out with the statements, I could say, what was the last time I produced, when was the last date I produced the statement? Oh, well, it was yesterday for this particular client. Okay, well, if it's within 7 days, exclude, DB report exclude that particular document so it doesn't produce the marketing material. A couple of other variables to look at as well is this DB switch group variable. In this instance, you can see DB switch group 1 is set, the variable DB switch group is set to 1, and DB switch file is set to DB client alt. So what that does is that when this report runs, it says wherever read group 1 is on this report, instead of using the client file, which would have been the default, use DB client alt. And you can do that on a before report basis, or you can do that on a record by record basis, though it is better to do it as an upfront in the before report section. So that's useful if you've got history files, if you've got sub-files. You might have a situation where you've got yearly files, so there might be, you might want to use a year's file as opposed to, so you might have year-to-date sales. So instead of using my client sales file, use client sales 2010 and make that switch group 2, because that's what the read group is for the client file. So effectively, we've done this as a read group basis as opposed to a file name basis, because I may actually want read group 1 to use DB client alt, but I also have the client being read in read group 4 and in read group 6 in my report. So if I put in client file here, then it would replace all clients. But in this case, I can value mark delimiter this and say 4, and then also for 4 to use DB client alt. Or alternatively, leave that out, and read group 4 will read the client file. Okay. DB email 2. I'm not going to demonstrate how that works because I don't particularly have this type of report to demonstrate it. But if I'm producing I suppose we'll just DB client rep 51. We'll just have a quick look at that. Because it could be a report that has. Okay, so this is this was actually part of a course to another client. This is a 1 page per client style report where we've added the individual sections for the rep 50 and the rep 51 as far as the includes are concerned. What I can do is I can add to the top of this report in text at email print, and it must appear in the header of the report, and the higher the place in the header the better off it is, and you are best to make it as wide as you can, even though it may impinge on other fields, you're best to make this as wide as you can, because you want the actual displayed version of this report, of this, to contain the actual email address. So when I run this report, I'll just see whether I've got a report read process on this particular report. I do. So in the report read, it's called Rep 51. So in my DB client program, I can go to the report read section. Here we go. I've already there's one there that's got enough to support this. So what I'm going to do is just put some email addresses at the top of this form. I'll just put a counter, DB store. I mean, typically you wouldn't do it this way. Typically you would have an email address. You would typically have an email address in your client file that you could add to the report. I'll just get rid of that, put that there. Right, so if the report's Rep 51, I want DB email 2 to be David at DesignBais. Otherwise, if it's less than 5, if it's greater than 5, I want it to switch. Compile that, and I'll run this report. Turn the preview on. Right, so you can see I've got a 194-page report. It's not pretty, but it's effectively emulating a page-by-page report. So as we go through the pages, you can see email print at the top, and then we get to here, and now email print is david@bas.com.au, and that will continue on. Now what that gives me now is an option in my report production, in my report options here, to email pages to the recipients. So if this was a statement run, and there was 1,000 clients in the statement run, and they've got email addresses at the top. When I say email pages to recipients, this is now bringing me up a box that says from page 1 to 194, sender's email address. The email subject can be whatever you want it to be. The message text can be whatever you want it to be, and then you can save that as a preference if you like. So I've got various preferences set up now. There's a testing email one there that was set up by somebody else. So I can use somebody else's standard. So if you have default emailing headers that you want to set up for your statement runs and stuff like that, you can have those set up in this instance as well. There's an email of report one, which is my one that's standard. If I want to change that, I can add it, or I can delete the preferences at that point. So if I say from page 1 to 10, just to make it a little bit more reasonable, and submit that, what that will do is that will it says reports emailed to recipients. So then that's produced. That will essentially produce 2 emails, one for the david@designbais.com, and which was the first 4 or 5 pages, and the next one is to david@bas.com.au, which is the second 5 pages in that run, because I only run from page 1 to 10. So that gives you your ability then to produce your reports to a distribution list, if you like, and then have that be distributed automatically via that particular mechanism. Okay, so that's I think, about as detailed as we need to get. Somebody's, that wasn't really a question, so somebody's just typed in something that I don't understand as a question. If you have any other questions, the email address, somebody's asked, can the email address be a hidden variable? No, it can't be. It needs to be actually in the HTML. It can't be a hidden variable. But if you print the report, physically print the report, it will be, it'll not be there. If you email the report to somebody, it won't be there. It's only there to view during the preview stage. So for printed output and for emailed output, it actually doesn't appear. It's a blind field. So are there any other questions? No? Okay, well, if you do think of any questions, email them to support@designbais.com. If there's anything more that you need, that you would like to know about reports for another webinar session included in say the advanced report writers sessions in future webinars that we do, we are going to try and make these regular in the future. Please let us know and we'll make sure that gets included. So thank you very much, and we'll talk to you again on Wednesday with the on-form reports webinar, which was supposed to be today. Thank you very much.